How you doing, Milo? We're live. I guess we're live. Yeah. Thank you, David Freiberger, for my fancy shirt. If it wasn't for people's generosity, obviously I would have no clothes to wear. But I digress. Today we're going to take a look at this morning. First of all, project motivation. Go get your projects done. If you have a motor like this that you're building, go get it done. I'm going to try to get some paint done today on the big block Chevy that I'm working on. Try to maybe get the heads painted today. It just depends on how much time I have with doing this and then the video and then another live feed. I have to squeeze it in the middle there. But today we're going to talk about nitrous oxide because just like with turbos, there seems to be a lot of confusion. I get lots of questions about nitrous. Well, does it work with, and then you can add any number of things on this list. Does it work with a camshaft? Does it work with this camshaft? Does it work with a big camshaft? Does it work with a little camshaft? Does it work with these heads? Does this head like nitrous better? Does this intake manifold? I've actually had that question. Does this intake manifold work with nitrous? And I think in some of those cases, what happens is, particularly like with an intake manifold, so we'll take these kind of one at a time. On an intake manifold, I think that people's concern is, especially after this guy doing intake manifold tests on nitrous and showing distribution issues, I think that that's their question, I'm guessing. Or if they think that a particular design intake manifold doesn't lend itself to nitrous use. I'm hoping that's a distribution problem, and that's an honest question, and we can talk about that. But you have that issue with lots of different things. So I think that if it is distribution, that's a genuine question, but then it should be phrased as, is there a distribution issue with a single plane intake, with a dual plane intake manifold, with a long runner EFI manifold, with a short runner EFI manifold, yada, 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 all of that stuff. But know that basically speaking, nitrous will work with every intake manifold. There may be adjustments necessary with like some of the long runner stuff I've shown on the LS or the Hemi, and this particular one is a dual plane on a Buick 455 carbureted intake manifold. But on some of these, you can usually run 7,500, even 150 shot on a lot of these things without too much of a problem. There may be some imbalance in the distribution. There will be imbalance in the distribution on a single plane and on a dual plane manifold that really has nothing to do with how you're injecting it. Like we talked about this before on different kinds of plates, a diagonal one or perpendicular or crosshatch or whatever, equal distance, perimeter plate kind of thing. All of that, is it all spraying in evenly? Yes, but the question isn't, is it spraying in evenly? The question is, what happens after it's sprayed in the manifold? Do all the cylinders grab the same amount of nitrous? And in this case, since it's a wet system and fuel, do they all grab it? Do all the cylinders grab it evenly? Does it go into each one in an even amount? That's a whole different thing than how it's injected. That has more to do with the intake manifold design, and you can't cure that with nitrous, unfortunately. The only way that you can do that is if you put an individual fogger system in and then inject the right amount of nitrous. But even on these dual plane manifolds or on some of these other manifolds that are not equal runner or equal cylinder filling, let's say, then you have one cylinder producing more power in a particular part of the RPM range. You're just adding nitrous to that. So that's the cool thing about nitrous, is that no matter what you're working with, and this is the way that I like to look at it because I'm a big picture kind of guy, I like to look at the motor as just the motor. Forget about what individual thing you're talking about. Forget about what camshaft it has. Forget about what cylinder heads it has, what intake manifold it has, what the compression is. Just look at the motor. What is the motor doing? Okay, I have a 400 horsepower motor. Then ask yourself, can I add nitrous to my 400 horsepower motor? Yes, you can add 100 shot, and now it's a 500 horsepower motor. And then you can, escalate that up to different levels of nitrous that you would add. You get into problems with nitrous when you start trying to add too much nitrous. And for me, it's relative to the naturally aspirated power output. So if you have a 200 horsepower motor, especially if it's like a 200 horsepower V8, a low performance Smog 305, let's say, that makes 200 horsepower, and you're trying to add nitrous to it, well, you're going to have trouble adding 200 horsepower worth of nitrous to that, because that'd be 100% of the NA power. It just doesn't want to process that much. One of the problems that you run across is that when you're adding nitrous to something, you are displacing the airflow. So as we add nitrous, the airflow through the motor actually goes down. As a benefit, the nitrous carries its own oxygen molecules and says, hey, less is getting in, but don't worry, I brought a bunch of extra with me. So now we can go in and make more power. And that works fairly well. The same thing with cylinder heads. Okay, does this big cylinder head like nitrous? Yes. Does the small cylinder head like nitrous? Yes. Does the cylinder head that has a whole bunch of extra exhaust flow like nitrous? Yes. Does a 4-valve one like nitrous? Yes, they all do. So again, if you just look at whatever combination you have as a naturally aspirated combination, what does it could be a turbo too, because turbos love nitrous as well. So do supercharged motors. If you look at the combination as I'm making this amount of power, and now with nitrous, I'm going to add this much more power to it, that's the first step. Then we can, after that, and in fact, that will be our poll for today. The question is, when we're talking about nitrous, should Richard test little things like nitrous distribution and different types of nozzles? You know, there are big things like we have a motor and we add 100 shot of nitrous to it. That's the big thing. And then when we do that, we add 100 horsepower. The little things that people get wrapped up about when we're having conversations, the comments that I get from doing a video or on the live feed, the questions then become people want to argue about the little things. Like we always go down the golf ball dimple down that path, down, you know, do we need to be talking about those little things like that? Same thing with nitrous. Do we even need to be concerned about the perimeter plates or the nozzle types? Like if we put a nozzle in that has a spray bar and then a hook at the end of it, and that's a straight shot, and you aim all of the what I would call the little things that make less of a difference than just adding the nitrous. So are those things important to test? So that will be our poll for today. But on the nitrous thing, like I said, surprisingly, I get in cylinder heads and more cylinder heads and intake manifold than camshaft, or more cylinder heads and camshaft than intake manifold. I think most people realize intake manifold, other than the distribution concern, is you can run it with almost anything. And in some instances, when you're worried about distribution, like with a long runner intake manifold, you just run a dry shot, just run the nitrous in front of it, because nitrous turns from a liquid to a gas. So as a gas, it can better find its way through the intake manifold like air does. And then you just inject the extra fuel, because the fuel as a liquid is the thing that would kind of like come out of suspension and maybe not would be less likely to follow the intricate path inside of an intake manifold. But on camshafts and on cylinder heads, there's more of a concern. So like with nitrous, we're adding a bunch of oxygen molecules. Do we need a camshaft that's a dedicated nitrous camshaft that will have more exhaust duration so that we can get all of that? We got all the intake in basically because we added a bunch of oxygen molecules. Do we need more exhaust duration to get it out? At some point, those kinds of things can be beneficial. For 99% of us, that's not where we're at. Unless you're running a dedicated nitrous race motor and you're running 2 or 3 or 4 kits on it where those kinds of things become a concern, then there's something to be said there. But if you run a nitrous kit on some motor that you're running at the track or on the street or wherever you're doing it, just adding nitrous to whatever you have will definitely work. It will work with your stock cam. It will work with your RV cam or truck style cam. It will work with any sort of performance cam. It will work with a blower cam. It will work with a turbo cam. It will work with a blower. It will work with turbo. It will work with all that. You just think about you adding 100 horsepower worth of something to something that you already have. That's what happens. Same thing with cylinder heads. Now, cylinder heads, like we talked about with the camshaft, on very high horsepower, absolute things where you're running multiple kits, there may be things that you'd want to do, a nitrous exhaust port, a different valve angle, that you'd want to do, more exhaust flow relative to intake flow. Maybe you'd want to change the flow relationship there, that you could then. The thing is that you're trying to do with nitrous, the dedicated nitrous motor, is you're basically trying to get the motor to process more nitrous. So you have an NA motor, and still in the big picture, the easiest way to do that, to get a motor to process more nitrous, is to make the motor more powerful. So if you have a 700 horsepower NA motor, you're going to be able to run more nitrous on that than you are on a 300 horsepower motor. So if you have a 300 horsepower motor, you want to run 1,000 horsepower with a nitrous, you're going to have nothing but trouble. But if you have a 700 horsepower motor, I think you're kind of still going to have trouble, but less trouble than you would trying to do it on 300 horsepower. But then if you have a 1,500 horsepower or 1,000 horsepower, 1,200 horsepower or 1,500 horsepower NA motor, and you want to run 1,000 horsepower with a nitrous, you're going to be able to do that. So that's the first step. And then these other things like the cylinder heads, if you want to do things to make that so that it will process more nitrous successfully without constantly having to change pistons or rings or burning that stuff out of it with the nitrous, having backfires and all of the things that nitrous guys have to deal with, then there's something to be said for that. But you don't need to be concerned with that. The 99% of us don't need to be concerned with that if you're just putting together a junkyard LS. Oh, do I need to have a special camshaft? Do I need to have a special cylinder head? No, you don't need any of that. If you have a 5.3 with a cam in it, what I always tell people on nitrous, I tell them the same thing that I tell them with a centrifugal supercharger, is that with nitrous, just make a really powerful NA motor. Whatever you need to do, whatever your budget allows, with an LS, a lot of guys just put a cam in it. And then if you want to put a carbureted intake manifold on it, you could do that, put a nitrous plate on it. If you want to run it through a fuel injected deal, do that. Whatever you can do to make the motor more powerful, naturally aspirated, you're going to end up with more power. So if you start with a 400 horsepower motor and add 150, then you got 550. But if you start with 500, then you have 650. So did I do my math right there? So start out with, if you want to add a certain amount of nitrous, start out with a more powerful starting point, and then you have a more powerful ending point. So that's the big thing for nitrous, is if you're going to add a certain amount of nitrous, and then if you start out like we talked about, if you start out with more NA power, you can add more nitrous, because as a percentage, the percentage will come down because you're starting out with much more. That's how I recommend guys look at nitrous, kind of the same way that I recommend when they look at boost. Just look at your starting point, and then boost just multiplies that. The nitrous just adds on top of that. So if you're starting out, like I said, don't try to add a bunch of nitrous to a low horsepower deal. Do something to make more power, and then it will process more nitrous successfully. And that's how nitrous works. I like the thumbnail that I put up. If you guys have taken a look at it, the thumbnail is very cool. It's a plate system on the Buick 455, which we ended up running nitrous on, and it worked just fine. I like to watch I love seeing the nitrous activated and being able to see it actually go in. So you can see how the distribution is. You can see the angle of the nozzles that are cut in. Usually they have tubes in them that are cut in those, and how well they work. We tried a bunch, that we're talking about the little things here on the pole, and we've tried lots of different kinds of perimeter plates and crossbars and double bars and all kinds of stuff. And basically it has to do with the big things on nitrous are the jetting that you use, and then the pressure from the nitrous bottle, and then how full the nitrous bottle is. So those things are kind of help dictate what the nitrous flow is that goes into the motor. And the nitrous flow into the motor is going to kind of dictate how much power gain you get from the nitrous. So and I'm guilty of this too. With the nitrous stuff, you're like, yeah, we picked up 125 horsepower from 100 shot. Yeah, that's just because you flowed 125 horsepower with the nitrous in there. It's not because one thing is inherently better than the other. The thing is that you just put enough pressure. The bottle was full. You put enough pressure in the bottle to get a given amount of flow, because the flow obviously is dependent on the bottle pressure. So you also had your tune spot on, which, back in the day, we ran nitrous stuff really, really rich. We got to be safe. You don't really have to. Most guys that are running nitrous are not running it at 10-1 or even 11-1. They're running it much leaner than that. If you run good fuel, you don't have to take as much timing away. Although in the timing thing, we've seen that if you take away 2 or 3 or 4 degrees or whatever with the nitrous, or you don't take away any, a lot of times there's not a big change in the power output under nitrous. There will be some, and this is especially true as you go up in kit size. So you go from, a lot of times, for instance, if we run 100 shot on a 91 octane motor or whatever, if we were running 100 octane in that, we wouldn't take away any timing. We would just run it in the timing that it has. I've even done that on 91 stuff. If we're running 75 or 100 shots, sometimes we just don't take away any timing at all. And I've done that did that in my Mustang for years and years and years, and went through probably 15 or 20 bottles. I was only running a 75 shot, and I was running it in front of my EFI manifold on my 5-liter. And I didn't have a provision to take away timing. We would just run the nitrous, and I ran it on road courses and all kinds of stuff like that. It helps if you put a little bit more octane in it. I like doing that as a safety margin, but it will obviously work. It's a good safety feature to take that timing away. And since you're not losing very much by doing that, and you are adding safety, I would always recommend that. But when in our idealized environment on the engine dyno, where the water temperature is cold, we got good airflow, we have perfect tuning on our nitrous setup, because what we do is, like on a carbureted setup, we have a fuel flow orifice that when we run this thing with the fuel pressure, we know what the fuel pressure is while the thing is activated. So we don't just set the fuel pressure and then plumb it in, because then when you activate it, the fuel pressure changes. So we test that with the fuel pressure set up while it's running. And so when we do these kits, usually it's one and done. I mean, we have the nitrous jetting that we want, we have the fuel jetting that we want, we have the fuel system tested so that we know, and if we take away timing, we take away timing. So we know that when we activate it, that it's going to have this much fuel flow with that jetting. And because we've done it so many times, we know how much fuel flow it needs for a given nitrous jet size. We heat up the bottle, and the Westech has this little nitrous bottle sauna. Basically, has a heating element inside a water bath, and then we heat up the bottle, get the bottle temperature at the right temperature, and check that, and then make our run. And then usually the thing works like flawlessly the first time. It makes it really easy. And this is a system that Brule kind of set up. And so shout out to Brule for that, for making all that happen. So when we tested it, it works very well. But nitrous, again, it just adds to what you have there. So the more that you have that you're starting with, the more you'll end up with. So get your projects done. Let's see what you guys got going on right now. But first, let's see how our poll is doing. Should Richard test the little things like nitrous distribution, different types of nozzles? 66 to 34% saying yes, that I should test the little things, and we should talk about that. So we should talk about the golf ball dimples and all of that stuff. So let's see I'll scroll back and see what kind of questions we have. Florida's in the house. Rhode Island is in the house. Let's see. Alabama checking in. Why is it hard to find information for nitrous and E85 air fuel targets? We run the same air fuel targets, but we're doing it on the gas scale. The problem really becomes not E85 versus, because you should already have your air fuel dialed in. If you're running E85 on your engine already, you should already know what your air fuel is. And then when you're doing nitrous, you should keep that consistent or maybe slightly richer. The problem becomes when guys try to do multiple fuels. So if let's say you're running pump gas, but you have a separate tank, and then you're adding E85 when you're running the nitrous, it's not uncommon for guys to just add race gas with the nitrous, which I think can be beneficial. Just adding E85 will be a problem, because you have one air fuel for the gas and then a different air fuel for the E85. I mean, they actually could both be the same on the gas scale, but your air fuel, your combined air fuel, is going to be some sort of weird reading for both of those. And that would be what I would look at, is the amount of flow for the E85 going through the nitrous. So we would look at that. You just look at that as a good starting point would be a percentage change that you would use for E85, like E85 needs 25% more fuel, let's say. So your jetting would have to be 25% bigger, but make sure it's not a 25% change in orifice size, because that's not how flow works. What are the best rings to buy for a boosted small block Ford? I don't know whose rings. We've used Total Seal stuff a lot. I know this is like boost, it enhances greatly what you already have. That's right. I only think nitrous cams are needed. The nitrous cams are very large, and it's probably going to be an exhaust temperature thing. Early for the poll. They used to build a sealed air box, would fog it. Everything gets what it needs. Washington State's in the house. I see you guys on YouTube putting it to junkyard. We run nitrous on junkyard motors all the time. If fuel prices continue to escalate, we'll have to add nitrous to your Flintstone mobile. The fuel prices have come down recently. How much can I mill my 882 heads in safely before getting into the intake manifold sealing problems? Most guys don't go more than 30 on those. You can hog out the holes a little bit, but you also run into China wall sealing problems. So you should check, because if you have a set of 882 heads, it may be that the block or the heads have already had some work done. So check it before you mill it and then adjust accordingly. Gabe, happy to help port and polish this 200cc Yamaha Blaster engine today. See if there's any increase. Oh, cool. Can you dyno vapor steam injection with nitrous? Manifold heater like a 2-head ultrasonic transducer. So how are we injecting vapor or steam with nitrous? And then my other question is, why would we do that? Dip will slowly work on spherical objects. See, we're already down the golf ball hole. It's a hole in one. So what we want to do is not ask a question with the word thoughts in it. If you're going to ask, if you're going to make a comment or ask a question, do not have the words, what are your thoughts? Or just the word thoughts. Got to rephrase your question. This is a theory behind perimeter plates being better accurate, or is it just theory? Like I said, if you're looking at a perimeter plate like a carbureted deal and you're spraying nitrous into the intake manifold, the fact that it's spraying everywhere, if you've seen a perimeter plate, it's it may have an equal amount of distribution in all those holes, but then what happens in the intake manifold is the thing, and it won't help that. It won't help what's going on in the intake manifold. Can you explain purging nitrous on the nitrous line? Yeah, they're just trying to make sure that the shot that they get is like 100% nitrous. So they're purging any excess air or not 100% nitrous, basically, that's in the system. So as soon as they hit it, they want all of that nitrous flow. And so you're getting rid of everything that would not be that. Just basically filling the line up all the way to the solenoid so that when it activates, it hits like right now, which could possibly be a traction issue, but they have all of that set up. Another interesting thing is progressive setups, although I haven't run a progressive setup on the engine dyno where it ramped in power. We've run multiple kits where we do 100 shot and then another 100 shot or more or whatever, and that works. But I've yet to see one track in gradually like I want it to be. Like if you look at the linear curve of a centrifugal supercharger kind of thing, I haven't seen a progressive nitrous system do that. I think they're pulse width modulating the solenoid. And you'd think that, I don't know how I don't know if the pulse width modulation can actually show that or if it can actually produce that, but I just haven't seen it, and maybe it is possible. Have you posted any videos with turbos and nitrous on LS? Yes, there's multiple ones. There's one where we ran nitrous as the intercooler to see how, because everybody talks about how cold it is. Nitrous is negative 129 degrees when it changes from a liquid to a gas, when it boils. Basically, we don't ever think about negative 129 being a boiling point, but that's what it is for nitrous. And so when it does that, obviously, it already being negative 129, and during this phase change, there's an influx of heat basically from the surrounding area, so it cools everything off basically. The problem is that guys talk about using it as an intercooler. It doesn't work very well as an intercooler, even when it's injected into the motor. There's just not enough of the nitrous relative to all the hot air. So if you have, in our case, like we have, let's say 800 horsepower worth of turbocharged hot air going into the motor, and we only have 100 horsepower worth of cold nitrous, you don't get that much cooling. In our testing, it was only about a 30-degree drop in charge temperature, which is nowhere near what we see on an intercooler. On an intercooler, we might see a 130-degree drop at that sort of boost level. That's a fairly low boost level, 10 pounds or something. And so it doesn't work that well. But what it does do is add a whole bunch of power. So on our 100 shot, we added 200 horsepower because it also raised the boost up. So the nitrous works really well with turbos, especially getting them spooled up, which is where I was talking about, like with progressive setups. If you can get a progressive setup to work down low, you don't need to feed in very much nitrous to get a turbo spooled up. Even a 50 shot added down low safely with the right timing. I would definitely retard timing there down low, but even a little 50 shot helps spool up a turbo a lot, because 50 horsepower at 2,000 or 2,500 or 3,000 RPM, if you do the math, is a lot of torque. So adding that much torque, which is how we improve boost response to a motor, has a dramatic effect on the spool rate of a turbo. Yep, it's like bleeding a brake line. Exactly. Get all the bad stuff out and only have the good stuff ready. It's the nerdy things that no one else talks about that makes me binge watch your videos. I do like testing esoteric stuff. The problem with that, the little things that I talk about, is testing the little things sometimes limits the audience, because if the audience really will know when I add, okay, I've added 100 shot to this motor, they're like, oh yeah, good, he added nitrous to that. Most people understand that. The number of people that understand me adding a perimeter plate as opposed to a crossbar plate, and trying to find a difference there and looking for subtle nuances there, they might go, well, you're just adding nitrous. One of them is adding nitrous and the other one's adding nitrous. They don't understand what potential distribution changes could be. And so fewer people understand that. And so the audience is smaller. So I want to have stuff so that more people understand it. And maybe that's just my job, is to help understand, hey, look, the number 7 cylinder was 14-1, which we don't want under nitrous. And all the other ones were 11-8 or whatever. So maybe that's just me having to do my job better. Let's see. J Ladio 11. So yeah, no, just ask your question. The only thing is, like, so we're going to hide user on this channel. Stupid bots, get out of here. What's ideal? I'm sure you mean ideal fuel pressure for fuel injection. There isn't an ideal fuel pressure for fuel injection. Different injectors are rated, flow differently at different pressures. Some systems, like throttle body injection, run between 9 and 15 pounds. Some of the port EFI stuff can be 45, 50, 60 pounds. It just depends. That's not really there's no ideal one. Can nitrous setup create the same power as a forced induction? No. Well, Yes and no. If you have a really big motor and you add a bunch of nitrous to it, you can make lots of power. Guys have already shown that on all these forms of drag racing. You cannot, like, we cannot take a 5.3 liter or a 6 liter like we did with the Big Bang deal and triple the power. So we went from, let's say, 500 horsepower to 1500 horsepower. You won't be able to do that with nitrous. You can't take a 500 horsepower motor and bring it to 1500 with nitrous. It just won't process that much nitrous at that NA power output. I have a Maximizer 5 that can do RPM based progression. So does it dial the nitrous in progressively? Does that work successfully? You're going to try afterburning. So you want me to ignite the fuel in the exhaust? They let out nitrous if the pressure is too high. Leave at the same bottle pressure so the engine makes the same power consistently. Progressive nitrous works great, and most solenoids have pulse width range that they like. Need to work with a vendor on that. So Walmart security, DIY AC. I'm not interested in building that. Again, like I was just talking about, because of the limited market or the limited like desire for that, I just don't think that that's a good way to spend the time. If I mill my stock 882 heads 30 thousandths, roughly how much would the compression ratio increase? You'd have to see. I would say probably that's going to be 5 or 6 cc's. So a little more than half a point would be a guess. Can nitrous be used on an old engine? Yes, it can. You have to measure individual EGT sensors to figure out the true difference. EGT sensors are good. The problem with EGT sensors are that they don't tell you air fuel. They only tell you temperature, and temperature can be affected in the exhaust by timing as well. So we like to use air fuel, and you can have both because we have headers set up sometimes for both. How low RPM wise are you willing to spray nitrous shot size in relation to NA power? We've run nitrous down low as 2000 RPM because sometimes we have motors that run only from 2000 to 4000 RPM. So you're running that at the start point. But I don't usually run big hits down there, and we take away a lot of timing because the problem is, like I said, if you do the math on horsepower equals torque times RPM over 5252, if you back calculate the torque on that, you see that a small amount of power added at a low RPM equates to a big torque rise. And so, you can run into more problems like that. I think I've even heard of nitrous being used on diesel engines. Yeah, it works really well on diesel engines. Anything with a diesel, any amount of fuel that you add to it, it makes more power. And so nitrous is one of the fuels. Other stuff too, propane and other things, methanol, all of like water mess setups for diesel engines. If you can put more fuel to it, it will add more power. I'd like to see hydrogen versus a nitrous shot. Doing a DOD swap on my wife's LS4. I'm going to use a sloppy stage 1 cam. Should I stick with the 243 heads or put 862 heads on? I wouldn't change the heads on it. You just need to put springs in it. Yeah, nitrous works with engines not built to work with it. Every engine is built to work with nitrous. Just as pro stockers, Winston Cup. Actually, IndyCar and lots of like racers were known to frequent the old NOS guys. Some guys are putting propane. Yeah, like I said, any sort of thing, vegetable, whatever you put in there, it on diesel stuff, it just wants more fuel because that's how they throttle them. Larry, the naysayers don't need to leave the channel. We want people here. We want people with different opinions here. That's why I'm here. And that's why I have these live feeds so that, I want people that have different opinions. I respect that. I encourage that. In fact, the thing that I don't encourage is obviously, and I've had to boot people off. There's a way to go about it. You and I can have a conversation about, hey, I like turbos and I like blowers, and then as long as one of us doesn't try to overpower the other one and say, look, your idea is not right and you have to like my idea only because every other idea besides my idea is bad. That's not the case. There's lots of good ways to do stuff. There's lots of good ways to make power. You can make really big NA motor, really high RPM ones. You can run turbos or blowers or nitrous, or all of that stuff is good. The fact that we get to choose is really the big thing. Wow, it would be awesome to see Lambda and EGT on every cylinder. What ECU do you use? Well, the EGT and the Lambda readings wouldn't be part of the ECU normally. We have that set up on the dyno, so we data log that stuff. The dyno does that. The ECU that I normally use is a Holley or a Fast or a MS3 Pro, I guess, Mega Squirt deal. Are there peroxide motors still racing? I don't know. Maybe land speed stuff. Yes, every engine is a nitrous engine and a turbo engine and a blower engine. And the thing about having EGTs and air fuel and temperatures and all that stuff is just having more information is always better. It's not always a necessity, and lots of guys do without it and are very successful in the thing that they do. If you keep doing something and keep whittling away at some, even using your method, whatever that is, guys get real successful at it. But we like looking at, I'm a data guy, so I love having all of the graphs and stuff. And so having that is always better. So if you can have more data, I'm all for it. I don't run 802s on everything that I run. Lots of our headers are not, or the headers at West Tech are not set up for that. Some of them are. Normally when I run it, I don't do that. I have an O2 sensor on one side. Sometimes we'll swap it over to the other side just to make sure that they're both kind of doing, like if it's a junkyard motor, I just assume that both sides are the same. Sometimes they're a little bit off, but it's good enough for what we're doing. And that's why I take sweeps when I'm tuning, is we'll go in and I'll have when we start out, we're running an NA LS like this 4.8 or the 5.3. We'll start out with 23 degrees of timing or something fairly low. We'll run it. I'll dial in the air fuel. We'll adjust it till it stops making power, whatever that is, 12.0, 12.5, 12.8, whatever it is. And then we'll start adding timing. And then we may take another swing at air fuel, just a little bit. And then what I'll do after that normally is I'll go, okay, I'm going to change the air fuel by half an air fuel point or a full air fuel point. I just take a big swing because I want to see if there's a trend. Oh, it likes it here. It didn't like it there. It didn't do anything. It just lost power. Lean it out half an air fuel point. I won't take as big a swing at that, leaning it out. We'll try that. And that way it will give me information. And then I'll also know that irrespective of whatever other data that I would have for 802s, it might tell me one is leaner or one is richer or whatever. But I'll know that when I took these big swings at air fuel, that's everything. There's nothing left. There's nothing I can do short of maybe individual cylinder tuning. And I've done that already. And that added very little power. It did make particulars particular cylinders safer, which is very good for longevity, but there's no more power to be had, really. Have you tested other runner designs for fast intakes with a plate kit? Do you think they would be safe up to a 250 shot? I don't know what you mean by other runner designs. No matter what your runner design is, like I'm hoping that you're talking about the fast adjustable manifold where they have longs and shorts and medium sized runners. Again, whatever runner setup you choose is going to dictate what your power curve is, NA, and then you just add nitrous to that. It doesn't matter. One setup is not going to like nitrous more than others. One setup is going to do something NA, and then you're just going to add nitrous to that. Is there a dyno LS that capable of holding a steady state load? Yeah, the dyno can be programmed to do whatever you want. JW, you want a daily driver, 6.2 swap, fuel mileage isn't to worry, but I want low RPM power. So those two things are actually going to kind of go hand in hand. If you want low RPM power and you have a truck and you got big wheels and tires on it, stroking the 6.2 would make sense. If it's just a 6.2, then the things that you're going to want to do is not put a really big camshaft in it. I don't know how much low speed power you want. Long runner LS3 style intake manifold, because it's going to have that on it already. All of those things are going to make more low speed power. Richard L92, a customer overfilled the oil, so we changed it. It kept fouling plugs, but the compression is good. Should just burn it off. Yeah, I would take the if fuel actually, if you filled it up enough that fuel got up into the cylinder, that would be a lot. But if you did that, take all the plugs out, spin it over a whole bunch, and try to get all the residual stuff out of there, and then put plugs in it and run it, and it should be fine. How about helium injection? Just make it lighter. Lightness adds power. Just add lightness. What turbo suggestion for a 418 Mopar stroker? You're going to need 500 horse. It's 500 horsepower NA. Well, it depends on what power you want. Just pick the turbo that you want for whatever turbo power you want. So 1,000 horsepower, obviously get a 1,000 horsepower turbo. That's S475, 7875 style. If you want to do more than that, they obviously have bigger ones, S480s, S485s. A 540 horsepower small block and want to add nitrous. Is 400 too much? I wouldn't start out at 400. I would start out at 100 and then 200 and then try 300. And it will start telling you that you have problems by not adding the desired amount of power with the jetting that you have. So don't start out with a 400 shot. Karlov, you don't need an 88 millimeter for 1,000 horsepower. That's that's way too big. Like to see a test on reading plugs. How many revolutions does it take for the timing mark to clearly show on it? That actually would be interesting. If you started out with brand new spark plugs and we made one pull under boost, I would assume we could try it NA also. But if we made one pull, will we see a timing strap at one pull? I think we will, but it would be interesting to see. I don't know how much idle. I don't know that you'd see a timing mark with idling, but maybe. Well, what firing order's on the shirt? This is LS. Or a cam swap small block. So how's our poll doing? 70% are saying yes, test the little things. It's the little things in life, right? Yeah, we got out because Freiberger did the 1.8 or the 183. What the heck is that, a firing order? He did the firing order for a small block Chevy. Now it doesn't come to mind. 1843657 So he did that one, and obviously that sold really well because his market is small block and big block kind of things. And then so we told him, look, you got to do an LS one too, because that's really what the market is, even more so than big blocks and small blocks. The LS, for instance, LS cams outsold for people that are selling cams. The LS cams outsell big block and small block combined, so it's not even close anymore. LS has taken over the world. I'd like to see a test running the same motor, but use a carb body EFI setup and then another using the same intake with port injection. I did that video, but we did it with a carburetor and port injection. And we showed the power differences there. A throttle body setup should deliver the same power or very comparable power to a carburetor using the same intake manifold. The thing that the throttle body injection should allow you to do, if it cooperates, is where what you can't do on a carburetor, or is more difficult to do on a carburetor, is we can't tune the air fuel at a specific RPM. So if I'm 14 to 1 at 3,800 RPM and it's 13.0 everywhere else, I can't just tune the air fuel right there with a carburetor. The only way to do that would be to redesign your metering block, probably. But that's beyond the scope of most people. But with a throttle body injection, you would be able to do that. You'd be able to take away fuel specifically at that RPM, which would be good. I don't know, judging by what we got when we were doing individual cylinder tuning, I don't know that that would translate into a lot of power. If it was really bad, we might get a little bit, but at least it would make it safe. To clarify, when reading plugs, how soon do you need to check them after a power pull? You should shut the motor off immediately and not idle it. In fact, when we were talking to people out at Bonneville, and they make their run and then idle back, and some guys even drive it back to the pits. And if they have a vehicle that they're not towing back, and we're like, you can't tell anything about the plug now. You don't have any idea. You need to be wah, poof, and then click it off. That will tell you what the plug was doing when it was under load at wide open throttle. It hasn't taken over the world. Well, it has for the last 2 decades. I did, Mike. I did test nozzles. The cool nozzles that like were NOS did them for the modular motors, and what they were was an insert that went between the injector went into the nozzle, and then the nozzle went into the injector hole in the intake manifold, and it had 2 lines running to each one, so it looked like a direct port setup kind of, and then they injected the nitrous and fuel with the fuel from the injector. Injected that right into the port. So they work pretty well. I don't think that they do them anymore. I just think it was an expensive solution to a problem that maybe wasn't there. Put a wideband on a carb years ago and found there are possible limitations, one being really rich under D-cell. That was one of the biggest wastes of fuel and why I think engines wash down. You'd have obviously a very big draw. So I'd have to look at the passages of where it would be drawing fuel. It's not going to be drawing them from the, shouldn't be drawing them from the booster anymore. Is it drawing them from is it drawing it from the idle circuit then maybe? Isn't a hot stop bad? Why would it be bad for the motor? Why would it be any different than letting off the throttle? JW, man, you build the thing that you want to build. Forget about the haters. We don't care about them. I like every kind of build. Like the SEMA show cars are a good example. People obviously bash the SEMA show stuff because it's all hodgepodge together just to be there and be on the show. I understand that in the deadlines that people have to do when they announce stuff and then it's time to get going. A lot of times there's not time to get that all done, and it only has to be there on display. That's fine. They put a lot of work into it. That's fine. Guys that take their cars just to show, they don't ever drive them. They roll them out of a trailer. They put them. They're on display. They're every nut and bolt is detailed to the finest thing. That's their thing. That works out good. I personally like driver cars that you could get out and enjoy, but that's my thing. I'm more of a road race guy than a drag race guy, but I appreciate guys building drag race cars, Bonneville cars. All of that stuff is good. Guys that have these giant lifted trucks that never see, that never have dirt on them. That's okay. You're a truck guy and you like it and it's big and it's lifted and it's shiny and it gets truck chicks if that's your thing. All of that is fine. Everybody do the thing that you want to do. Again, that's why I like where I am, because people are different and I like seeing all that difference. Is there an ideal nitrous to fuel ratio? No, there's not. Nitrous will work with lots of different air fuels. Yeah, Dan, fuel injected cars shut off during decel. That helps with fuel mileage for running at Daytona, I guess, but certainly Le Mans. .62 will definitely be better than the 5.3. It'll just by itself, it's going to be a lot more torquey. If you look at to get an idea, and I think I did a 6.2 on there already. If you look at the video where I compared a stock 4.8 and a stock 5.3 and a stock 6.0, and I'm sure a stock 6.2 because I ran an LS3. If you look at all of those, you'll see how we came up in torque from them being bigger, basically. In the case of a 6.2, it's also better because it has, different cylinder heads and a different camshaft and stuff. I've been watching a lot of Bank stuff about air density and his iDash, but really makes me want to build a ram air setup to feed the supercharger on my GTP. Cold air going to the motor is a critical element in performance and safety. So anything that you can do to get cold air, especially to a turbo or a blower, which is going to heat up the air after it does what it does. But get cold air going to that, very, very critical. We spent a lot of time and energy on my supercharged Mustang routing the air going into the blower, which was no picnic because it's aimed back toward the firewall right next to the header. So getting cold air to that was a critical thing, and it paid off. We were able to run, even back in the day, this is way back in the 90s, run the supercharged motor at the Silver State race, wide open throttle for, the race was 42 minutes. We went over 30 minutes, 32 or 33 minutes at wide open throttle without stopping, without letting up. So just at wide open throttle, basically a 30-minute dyno pull up against an aerodynamic load as fast as the car would go. And we did that non-intercooled. We weren't running a lot of boost. We were only running 7 or 8 pounds at the time. But we had a nice consistent charge temperature because we had ambient air going into the blower, and the temperature just stabilized during the run. It was pretty cool. Intercooler on an NALS. It's really hard to get colder air with an intercooler and not have a restriction on an NA application. Guys do it at Bonneville by having pressurized air go across the intercooler core where they're force feeding air past the core into an NA motor, and that works fairly well. But if you can cool it without a restriction, it would help. Intercoolers help every boosted engine. Yes. Set the cruise control. Let go. I did have cruise control, although we didn't set it. I wish I would have. I don't know now if there's a limit on cruise control on the Mustang on how high it will let me set it. I know I've set it over 100, but I don't. We never tried it at full throttle at going that fast. The horror. You want peak torque at 2,500 RPM. I don't recommend that on a gas motor. You should want to make peak torque later than that. But if you want to do that, you can probably do that with a 3076, a single 3076 turbo. You could even go smaller, although wanting boost response there is going to limit power production through the rest of the RPM range. The fender intake on my Monte Carlo supercharged works pretty good. Yeah, that's good. New Camaros use AC to cool the air. What factory Camaro does that? I know that the Demons were doing that, but I didn't know the Camaro was. Ever thought of doing an individual O2 and EGT to monitor what distribution is from a single jet into the intake compared to spraying direct? We did do that. If you look at the, I didn't do it as I didn't compare it to port, but we did do the 802s and did a nitrous distribution test with spraying nitrous in front of the throttle body, but it wasn't a dry system. Something I'll never forget is when Banks said turbo is a multiplication of what's there already. Dan, so the GT2 won't engage over 145. What are they going to do? Porsche has, in Germany, they have Autobahns where they would be running those way over that. You have to be able to set the cruise control at like $180 or something. Factory turbos make peak torque very low. Yeah, they have peak boost as low as 1,800 RPM. Factory spends a lot of time tuning those to make sure that they don't hurt anything. How much of a power loss do you think I will have when I mount the hydraulic steering pump onto the belt drive? Not the belt drive for the cam, right? The belt drive, just an accessory belt drive. Yes, everyone hit the like button. Andrew, I've noticed in dyno tests you usually pull to peak power RPM. We usually go a little bit past that, pulling beyond the peak to the practical RPM. I don't know what you mean by practical RPM limit of a combo. A lot of guys like to rev it out, which is not a good idea. If you make peak power at 6,500, there's no reason to run it to 7,500. There might be a reason to run it to 7,000 though, so that you could take the top average peak of the thing where you would be shifting at. I have to give 4 degrees of timing and 14.7 air fuel to keep my 5.7 Hemi from knocking at 2,200 at 9 pounds of boost. I took away a lot of time to figure out that rich air fuel was making it So the rich air fuel was making it detonate? That seems odd. Although if you've taken away a bunch of timing down low and you have boost down that low, maybe you're getting temperature from afterburn or something? That seems like not right. That seems way too lean, especially at that low speed. But if it's if it's working, if that's what you're doing and it's working and it hasn't blown up, then that's a win for you. We're going to shut our poll off at 73% saying yes, I should do the little things. It is the little things. 27% saying no. And I'm wondering if the air fuel reading that you're getting is not accurate because you're not burning at all, maybe. Would richer air fuel compensate for lack of octane to prevent detonation? No, you can't overcome the detonation threshold of the motor based on octane with extra fuel. You can change it a little bit, but a 10-to-1 air fuel won't stop it from detonating if you're trying to run on 87 octane. And sometimes making it richer will uh, create detonation. Can be problematic. Something is amiss. Misfire, get it? 2 more minutes. Got stuff to do. You guys got to go get projects done. Get those projects done. Okay, Barry, yours will be the last one for today. I got to go gap a 4.8 so I can throw boost at it. No cam because it already has a turbo cam. The stock cam is that. Although I have to say, any cam that you put in there is going to add a lot of power, and especially under boost because all that's multiplied, which is nothing but good. I will see you guys all tonight. I'm going to work on another video, which will be 4853 or 440-inch LS base kind of thing. I need to mix in something else because I have a flood of all the stuff that I did the testing down there. I do have a very cool tuning video that I'm doing because people have wanted tuning. So I'm going to show them stuff that we did where we changed air fuel, we changed timing and all that, and show you what it looks like on the setup on the Holly. And then also I did the plug gap. We went out from 10 thousandths plug gap to 100 thousandths plug gap. So what happens when we do that? It's all good stuff. I'll see you guys all tonight. And we're ending. My